Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week, we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. All right. I've recorded this 3 times, and it's now 9:03 p.m. the night before. I released this at midnight, so I'm doing a solo episode tonight, which is exciting and new. And part of why I've done this so many times is when you have someone else to talk back and forth with, you have like a pause to gather your thoughts. And I felt like I was really rambling in the first one. The second one felt better, but I didn't make the points I wanted to make. So the reason for having a solo episode this week, in case you're curious, I was in California all last week on the West Coast for work. I travel there 6 times a year, and it is a Sunday to Thursday long week. And we had tentatively talked about recording together on Friday, and when Freeman texted me Friday morning, I was like, I just can't do it. So I've thought that a solo episode would be fun for a while, just to sort of share my story. And as I have thought about this throughout the day, as I recorded it twice, and now I'm rethinking through, there are sort of 3 sections of this podcast, if you will, that I'm trying to separate out. So part of what I think is valuable about hearing a story, someone's story, anyone's story, and not just someone's story that is similar to yours, or that even has anything to do with you. I think anytime you can hear, and the camera keeps doing this blur thing, so if you're just listening, you won't see it, but if you're watching on YouTube, sorry if it goes in and out of focus some. It's making me crazy too. Some of the benefits of hearing other people's stories are that you learn about other experiences. It helps you understand sort of where they came from and how they think, what shapes them, things that they don't want them to, don't want to shape them going forward, just lessons learned. So I wanted to share my story because we've talked so much about youth sports and the dynamics of coach, parent, player relationships and just the general environment around sports these days. My path was a little bit different. And so whether you're someone who's hoping to play in college or start playing, if you are a coach of someone, I'll talk about team dynamics and coaching dynamics in leadership a little bit in the middle of this podcast. And then if you're a parent, I'm hopeful that some of the little tidbits that I share about my parents and the support system that I had growing up in general, but primarily in the sports world as it pertains to this conversation, I hope that people can take a couple things away from that, because I owe a lot of my success to my support system, starting with my parents and my family, continuing on with a lot of the coaching staff I had early on in my career that led me to be able to have a successful end of my career. So we'll talk about some of those things, and then hopefully I'll wrap up with a couple of lessons learned. So to start, my career volleyball-wise was pretty swift compared to some people's. I didn't start playing volleyball until the 8th grade. I had frankly never touched a volleyball until the 8th grade. Basketball was always my sport. My dad played in college. I was always tall, for my age, and so basketball was just sort of where I gravitated. My 8th grade year, the volleyball coach, who was also my homeroom teacher, the way I tell it was, she was like, "Hey, you're tall, come play." And I was like, okay. And I've always been a trier of new things. My husband always says, like, I can't function without some chaos in my life, which I think is true. And that's something that I've sort of learned more about myself as I've gotten older. I used to think that it was just this, it used to feel like a big long list of things to do all the time, but I realized that I create this list because I am excited to do things. I'm excited to try things. I'm excited to figure things out. And if I come up with an idea, I want to solve it right then and there. So I think I used to view it as this daunting task list that just felt like it was never ending. But now that I think I know where that comes from, and it comes from a positive desire to learn and to try and to discover things, I think I view it a little bit as a superpower. So I played 8th grade and I got MVP that year, which, looking back, I don't know how much of an MVP I was in the middle school volleyball world, but it obviously was a sign to me that, okay, I think I'm pretty decent at this. And I ended up playing my first club season, and the mother of a girl that played in my club, who also played at Cardinal Gibbons, which is where I went to high school, which is also where I met Freeman, or Jim, the co-host of this podcast. He was my coach there at Gibbons, and I was going to go there anyway. My brother was already a senior there my freshman year. But if you don't know the Gibbons volleyball history, it had a serious dynasty era, and it very well may still be in their dynasty era. But the time that I was starting at Gibbons was like in the first probably third of it. It was like really ramping up to where it was a consistent winning program. And for some reason, this mother, I don't know if she encouraged me to try out for varsity or someone told her it was okay to do. I have to ask Freeman if he has any recollection of this. But nonetheless, I tried out for the varsity team as a freshman, which at the time was not really, I was the only freshman my freshman year. I'm not sure how many there were the year before me. So of course I was very intimidated at tryouts, but I made the team. And I knew very early going into that I wasn't going to see much of the court. It was a very established team, a great group of seniors that were just crushing it. We won the state championship that year. So I went into that freshman year on varsity knowing that A, I wasn't going to see a lot of playing time, but B, I had this really good group of, upperclassmen, I guess, who understood leadership and the culture of the program, which I know was came down from above from the coaching staff. And I'll get into that shortly. But the short of my volleyball career was by my sophomore year, I was talking with colleges about the recruiting process. And back then it was, I guess, not like it was today. I didn't have a highlight reel or I don't know what the protocol is today for recruiting, but I talked to a handful of schools. They were at the club tournaments and things. And there was one school that was consistently interested. And to be frank, there were other schools that were interested as well that would have been more exciting, more well-known, maybe considered better programs. But none of those schools that I visited felt like the one. And I didn't know what was going to feel right. I couldn't have told you at the time what was missing. I just didn't get this like, oh yeah, this is it. There were things that I liked, but nothing that really screamed like this is where you should go. So there's this one school, Campbell University, which is where I ended up going. They had been really pursuing me. And I knew that, but the two things I knew about Campbell were that A, the mascot is the Fighting Camels, and that I went to Girl Scout camp there in elementary school. And so I didn't have a great perception of this program. So by my end of my sophomore year, my coach was like, she knew that my club coach, she knew that I wasn't finding schools that I was particularly thrilled with. And she was like, Campbell's really interested. You should just go visit. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? So my parents and I drove down there. It's about an hour from home. And I think before we even met with the coaches, like we just parked our car and walked around campus for a bit. And I think we all, like, I felt it was good. I think my parents sensed that I was feeling happy. And I think I knew before I even did the big tour and everything, the official visit, that this was the place. I knew going into college that, I desired to play Division I. I knew that my parents had spent a lot of money on club volleyball, and they never pressured me to, like, you can only go to places that will offer you a full ride, but I think I just sensed that on my own. But I wanted to play. I didn't have aspirations to, be on the Olympic team one day or go play pro in Italy for a couple of years. Like, that just was not on my radar. I wanted to finish my last 4 years playing as much as possible. And so I was perfectly content to go to a program that was maybe not the most exciting to, represent or the winningest program, but I wanted to play. And so that's what I did. And something shifted when I got there, and which leads me into the second sort of subject matter of this podcast, of this episode, I suppose, which is the contrasting cultures of leadership in coaching. Typically I think you assume that as you get older and higher up that you would get better and better culture and leadership and coaches. I actually think maybe I had the exact opposite. And I think it's probably good that I'm doing this episode solo without Freeman to chime in and be like, oh, shucks, because that's what he would say. I mentioned at Gibbons that the culture was very well established. And looking back is clearly what led to the success. Now, there were tons of talented athletes, like you could never deny that. But the culture of leadership in the coaching staff was hands down, from my perspective, looking back, what made those teams successful. My freshman year, we had a pretty stacked senior class. My sophomore year, I was pretty consistently playing, and we had an incoming freshman class of like 6 who all were very skilled volleyball players and talented athletes. 2 of whom, one was Katie Cabas, who you guys heard on the podcast a few weeks ago. She came in at freshman at 6'4". Her dearest best friend, Katie Camp, stood at 6'5" as a freshman. It was these like physically stacked size-wise, and then also very skilled freshman volleyball players who came in from a middle school program that just, you don't see that. And down to, I mentioned, I think maybe just last week or the week before, that one of the very specific coaching dynamics that I recall that's different from what I experienced in high school that shifted in college that I would have thought either would have continued or gotten better was, we talk about building athletes as people first and investing in the people and building the foundations for the relationship, not just player and coach, but as, mentor, mentee, whatever that relationship looks like. And something very specific I recall at Gibbons was if we were doing a drill, and we had a lot of, frankly, I think my drills, sometimes those drills were harder, but if we had a drill where we made an error, the response to an error, there was frustration if it was people, messing around, not paying attention, but if it was just you put in the effort and you made an error, rather than punishing the error, it was, let's try that again and make it successful. Like, it was always this undertone of, I believe that you can do it, so let's try it again. You can do this correctly, try it again. Now, it doesn't mean that didn't come with some undertones of frustration or something, but you could always tell that it was not anger of, okay, let's stop the drill, go run sprints because you messed up. It was, you can do better, so make it better and do it again. And to me, that trickles down to so many facets of that coach and player relationship, where when a player feels encouraged and supported by their coach, even that situation where player recognizes there was an error, coach does as well, coach is pushing the player to fix it, but is in a way of support and encouragement, not breaking someone down physically or mentally at that point. So even down to the way that we warmed up at Gibbons, and we had to zip our jackets all to the certain place in our jacket when we would walk into a gym, we had these habits and sort of rituals, which when we first learned them as dumb young high school players, no offense to any young high school players, but looking back, like, my view on things was just being dumb and young, that we thought were stupid. We had this very regimented warm up. And I remember so clearly the day that our coaches came in and said, we're going to do this new warm up process, or there goes the blur again, this new warm up routine, if you will. We were all like, you've got to be kidding me. People are going to think we look ridiculous. But once we got over that, because we didn't have a choice, it was, we're going to perfect this and make it look really good. We learned that having that discipline and consistency in that habit of how we show up, how we warm up, how we practice, how we shake hands with the other team, how we thank the officials, how we thank our parents when the game is over, regardless of the outcome. It was those habits that made those character traits. I think that's always like the core word for that, is these character traits, not just of an athlete, but as of a person, that made us all like good people. And so while we thought those warm-ups seemed kind of silly, when we walked into the gym and other teams saw us, it wasn't just, oh, there's that team that's probably going to beat us or that just beats everybody else. We just like emulated this level of excellence that I think was separate from our physical talent and our play. So that was something that I recognized while I was there, but looking back on it, I don't think I realized how that support system from a coaching perspective and culture trickled down, not just in practices, but in games when we were struggling. We had the support of, we practiced this, you can do it. And then that also led into how the players treated one another. It was supportive. I don't recall, I'm sure there were a couple of players or things where there was someone didn't feel like they were going to have playing time, or, those types of issues. But I can't recall like a single issue, which is something that you put a bunch of teenage girls in a room, you're going to have some. But again, it was that culture of expectation and trust and support that the team had, which came down from above, from the coaching staff. And so as I progressed into college, now part of the swiftness of my college career story and how I got there. So I started playing in 8th grade, and I committed by my right before my junior year, which is very early. I don't know what the timing is now for committing, but it was very early. And I actually was recruited to play a position that was not my position I played for the 4 years prior to that. If you know volleyball, I was a right side, and I was recruited to be a setter. Now, the setter is like a quarterback in football. Like, they run the show. You have to know the game, know the plays, know the defense, know the other team. You have to know that scouting report right and left, and your own team scouting report, right? Like, you have to run the show. And I actually always said I felt like my mental game was better than my physical, and not just like mentally tough, but I knew the game very well back then. So even if I couldn't physically perform at those types of things, I knew the strategy of the game very well. So that was something that felt exciting. And as I mentioned in the very beginning of this, I love a challenge. And so I was like, okay, like, let's do this. This is great. Like, this is something new. This is something fun. So I was sort of promised, some coaching, obviously, when I arrived, but I was going to be a freshman setter. So like, we had very little time to learn this protocol, right? So to transition from the coaching staff dynamic and culture that I had in high school and club, I was fortunate enough to play for really good club coaches as well. And then I actually didn't join the club that the rest of my school teammates were on until my senior year. So I really had two separate, my club and my school were two very separate groups of people and coaches. And I was very fortunate to have really solid coaching in both of those settings. But when I got to college, it became clear to me very quickly that the caliber of coaching, just from frankly, I think knowledge of the game was much lower than I expected. And that coaching of the new position just was non-existent. Again, if you know volleyball or if you don't, but basically the training was they put me in hitting lines, which hitting lines are basically you put the setter at the net and someone either tosses the setter a ball to set or a passer passes it. But it's basically receiving nearly perfect passes every single time and just setting at like kind of slow speed on repeat. And that's great for like ball placement and just practicing ball handling, but that does nothing for learning the dynamic and the pace of the game and play calling and, quick responses to other teams' moves and things. And so I developed this like insane level of anxiety. Now, I've dealt with anxiety prior to that, and I've dealt with it since, but nothing like I was physically ill before the first couple of matches of the season. And so I actually went to my coach, and we were a couple matches in, and I just said to her, I was like, look, I am feeling like immense amount of pressure and stress from this. And I just wanted to share with her that like if I seem out of sorts, like this is what's going on. And immediately I felt this sort of difference in the support portion of that relationship where the response was not, okay, how can we help you solve this? Like, what can we do to make you feel more confident, to make you feel like you've, you know, just, I mean, confidence is the only thing I can think of that I really needed at that point. But instead, the response was, okay, well, until you get this anxiety under control, you won't play, which of course did the complete opposite of what I needed. So that kind of trickled in. That was sort of I still played, but the rest of that year was a struggle for me, just trying to figure out where I fit in. Had I made a mistake that I shouldn't have come to the school where I was playing a new position? But by the end of the year, we had a full turnover of our coaching staff, we knew that was coming towards the end of the season. But the new coaches that came in, so when coaching staff turnover happens, typically the new coaches that come in are ones who have experience, turning a program around. They know that they're not coming into a well-established program. A lot of kids are leaving. They're having to recruit new kids and sort of build this program back from the bottom up. And that was something that was really talked about by these two new coaches. I went back to my old position, which I couldn't have been happier. I still would I would step from time to time during drills and practice, but I was thrilled that they recruited someone who actually knew what they were doing in that position, aside from just having decent hands. But again, the shift in coaching dynamic there was very similar. It was now the pressure I know any coach is under, but specifically Division I, where you have an administration where there's expectations of that program as a whole, not just in your sport, but the athletics program as a whole in any Division I program. And then you add on the layer that you are the coaching staff who's supposed to come in and turn this program around. So there's immense pressure to perform and to have your players perform to show that you stepped, your shoes in that role the right way. And so we felt that pressure and stress constantly in practice. So I gave the example earlier of, drills in high school when we would underperform or have an error. It was always a correction type response. It was always a supportive, how can we fix this? What went wrong to make that happen? Let's solve the problem and not just reprimand the fact that we made a mistake. And so that was something that was the reprimanding mistakes was what was experienced for basically the rest of my career in college. So, someone would make an error in a drill. Okay, we had to bunny hop up the steps of the gym, or someone, we had a really bad game once. I think I mentioned this in the last episode, that the next morning they had printed off the play-by-play, and they read the play-by-play for every error. They called out the player who made it, and we ran a full basketball suicide for every one of those, which, just waking up early after a double header weekend to run was one thing, let alone, I think we were at like 28 basketball suicides when I think it was me. It was like, okay, we get it, And I don't know that that was necessarily to say that like those coaches weren't doing it right, or but the foundation of their purpose and their method of coming in and turning a team around and supporting athletes was very different than that I had experienced in the past. And my team in college specifically had a lot of big personalities is the right word. I guess that's the fine way to put it. When you come to a Division I program where you were the best at your club or you were the best at your high school, and then suddenly you come to a program where everyone was the best, and that's why they got to that next level. A lot of kids have a hard time accepting, like, okay, we're back at the bottom of the totem pole. Let's start fresh. So we had a lot of those sort of, I don't know, big head kind of attitudes. And listen, we had some very talented athletes on that team who could just, get a kill whenever they wanted to, hit the crap out of the ball, jump out of the gym. But they didn't have the support system to make them successful on a recurring basis because of that sort of back of your mind concern that if I make a mistake, I'm going to be in trouble or I'm going to get yanked out of the game right away. The underutilization of some of those players was just so obvious, even to me as a player. So something I will point out that was a definite pivot in my volleyball career as a whole and sort of bumps me from the idea of, really excellent coaching and leadership and culture in my high school and club teams to sort of a downshift and some confusion early on in my college career, and then just a total like flip of the script. My junior year, I was playing the best I think I ever had played. And I'll never forget this moment. We were playing at NC State at preseason tournament. So my junior year, I'm a regular starter at this point in that position. I pretty much owned the right side position. And we were playing NC State. Now, when teams host preseason opener tournaments, typically the teams they invite are ones that they're pretty sure they can beat so they can win their own tournament, right? So, us being at NC State, and NC State was a good team then, but they weren't what they are now. They're incredible right now. But we were winning, and I was playing like out of this. I don't know. Like looking back on it, it was probably the peak of my performance that I'd ever played, and we were winning. And I actually think we ended up beating them. I think we did win that match. And somewhere around set 3, my shoulder started bothering me for the first time, and it really hurt. And that was pretty much the beginning of the end of my career. I had torn my labrum in my shoulder, and so it's my junior year, and we basically, I don't think we knew right away that was it, but it was pretty apparent to me something was wrong. So I pushed through our practice for a while, and we were doing all these, ace bandage situations to try to keep my mobility down. And now I had faced injury adversity in the past. I had a partial ACL tear my freshman year playing basketball, and that was when I was like, all right, we're done with basketball because volleyball's the focus. I tore my meniscus in my knee sophomore year, but that was a pretty easy surgery and recovery over the summer. But this shoulder was really, really something. And so with it being my junior year, leading into what I was hopeful would be like a really successful senior year, I had surgery in January of 2010, so after my junior year. And admittedly, my focus was how fast can I get back to play my senior year and play well? Because when I think through the time, like where I left off was like, I wanted to pick up where I left off at that game against NC State. And the reality is that was just not going to happen. But I worked really hard rehab wise. I had an internship in Boston over the summer. I took an hour-long train ride twice a week, to and from hour-long twice a week, to Boston College to see a trainer that our trainer from Campbell had recommended I go see. And I did my rehab up there so I could get back and play. And admittedly, we did absolutely rush it, partially pushing from me because I wanted to get back and play my senior season. So it wasn't long before I realized that we did push it way too much. I couldn't go full practice schedule my senior year. I definitely couldn't play a Tuesday game and a Friday-Saturday game. I would maybe play one of those 3 or a little bit in each of them, which was just not it wasn't consistently good for me, and it wasn't consistently good for the team. And so that was pretty much kind of where mentally I hung it up, which was hard because I went from this like peak feeling of like, okay, this is it, like this is the peak and this is where I'm gonna finish this out and ride, kind of plateau. Even if I plateaued at that point, I would have been fine. Like if this is where I can be for the next year and a half of my last 2 seasons, like I'm thrilled. So to go from that to my senior year, riding the bench, not even dressing out most days. It wasn't like I couldn't, wasn't good enough to play. I just really didn't dress out most days. So that was a struggle. But again, those moments of adversity when I think had I not had the experience of being a freshman on a successful varsity team, having supportive coaches and teammates and parents historically, looking in my past, I don't know how this injury situation would have gone for me in college. Because I didn't, it's not that my coaches were not supportive of my being injured when I was there, but at that point they had to focus on the team, right? It wasn't like, oh, Caroline, how can we support you? Because the bottom line was I was not going to get, well enough to get back and play. So it was like, all right, how can we move forward? What can my role be on the team when I'm not able to be on the court? So I think had I not experienced moments of adversity, experienced a supportive culture and leadership and coaching and teammates, and frankly the parents of my teams in the past as well, I don't know that I would have been able to have the mindset of saying, okay, what's my role going to be now? If I can't be on the court and be a point scoring, senior on the court who's leading in a physical performance way, what can I do for this team? Because I could have been like, you know what, let's just, I think I'm going to hang it up. I probably could have just walked away. I think a lot of people maybe would have. I don't know. But I could definitely say at this point that I had those skills and that self-confidence and that ability to know that I bring more to a team, any team, than just am I playing well and scoring points. And so that 100% is what carried me through that time. I was fortunate enough to get to stay on for my graduate year and be a graduate assistant coach and get my grad school paid for, which thank God. And I loved getting to be in a coaching role. And it was fun because I was coaching girls that I'd played with the year before, and actually graduate coaching with a girl who was 1 year older than me that I played with her my whole career. So it was fun to still be in that environment, but it was the same coaching staff. It was a lot of the same girls. And really, it was right before, I think just a few years after my graduate year was when I really felt like Campbell started treating their entire athletics program like a Division I program. My freshman year at Campbell, the football team was brand new. They literally only practiced. They had no games freshman year. Talk about commitment to your sport. I mean, Campbell hadn't had football in like 58 years, and so they were bringing it back. And so the freshman class that I went in with was, all they did was practice. I vividly remember being in the locker room. I think we were at Elon at a pre-season tournament, and we were playing terribly. And one of the seniors said something like, we're 2 weeks away from conference play. We can't be, playing like this. And now maybe I was just a dumb freshman. I didn't even understand the difference between conference play and what we were doing here at Elon today. Like at that point, I didn't, because it was never taught. Like Campbell volleyball didn't make it to the conference tournament. They never won. It was not. There was very little expectation, so we just didn't talk about the importance of conference play. So, media day was very basic, like headshots at, like you take at elementary school, yearbook photos. It was just not the level of, hype is a bad word, but I'm thinking like the level of hype that Division I program should have. You look now, social media was still new at that point, but you look now, they've got these really cool media days. They've got different jerseys for different things. They've got an Instagram page. There are so many ways that make the program feel legitimate, frankly. So that was something that I've really enjoyed watching Campbell Athletics come to what it is today. And the volleyball team especially has now won conference tournaments. They're one of the teams that people are looking to beat in the conference now, which I just think is so cool. New coaching staff that's been there since a couple of years after my grad year was done. He's been there ever since, and it's like the culture is, you can feel it through social media and watching them play. You can feel the difference in just the way that team jives together. So all that to say, a couple of key takeaways that I want to kind of wrap up with here. Number one, if you are an athlete or the parent of an athlete who has a desire, let me start with the athlete. If you are an athlete who would like to play at the next level, whether that's making your JV team in middle school, making varsity, going on to play college, regardless of what level it is, you can do it. It's never too late. I was 14 the first time I touched the ball, and I committed at 16 and a half. So that's it. You can do it. It's not too late. Trust your gut is something I will always say, and I'll get back to the parents and coaches and athletes in just a second. But trusting your gut of what feels right, what feels like you fit. I really always felt like I fit at Gibbons, and I think I struggled later on to figure out exactly where I fit based on how others received what I thought I brought to the table. Like the full package of what you bring and the people around you see it and appreciate it. That's the total package. If you feel that, like, you're in the right place. So it's not too late to reach that next goal. Parents, my parents were so supportive of me, and not just financially, and showed up to all my games, but something I recall was I had a couple of, in that short period between 8th grade and playing in college, I had a couple moments of burnout where I'd come home from practice and just be, mad and like wanting to quit. And every time I said to my parents, I think I want to quit, their response was always like, all right, well, you can call coach and let her know. It was typically club that I was wanting to quit. The club's, it's still the same way, but when you go and you play all the way to state championships for your high school team, the season is so long that club tryouts are like the next day. So it was just constant year-round playing. So I would tend to burn out by the time my club season came around. But my parents would always be like, okay. And it was never like, oh, well, we paid all this money, you better stick it out, or you better get a scholarship because we put all this time and effort in because that's what you want. It was never, ever that. But they put the responsibility on me. And I think, again, that was one of those support systems, like similar to the drill responses at Gibbons when we didn't perform well or we didn't execute. It was like the encouraging, you can do it again. It might have been stern, but it was do it again because you inherently knew the support of you can do it. My parents, I'm sure of it, were either you'll learn a lesson if you want to go to your coach and quit, or if you sit there and think about it long enough, you will think through what it is. Is this just emotion popping up and feeling sort of like heightened in the moment of something specific, or do you really want to quit? And obviously, I never really wanted to quit. And coaches, I hope that my description of those different coaching dynamics that I experienced, albeit in a more descending pattern than ascending pattern as my career progressed, the first one I explained is the one you want to strive for. Lastly, I would just say trusting yourself and looking for lessons in every situation. I had a lot of ups and downs, whether it be team dynamics, coaching dynamics, injuries. I actually I think I mentioned I played for a different club the majority of my high school career than the other players on my team and at my school. And sometimes I got the kind of like, well, why aren't you playing with us? Like I either felt it or I would hear it from people, but I just didn't want to. I wanted a different group of people during my like off season from high school. And so like trusting your gut, learning from every situation, all of those pivots in my career, for good or for bad, rather, look for the lessons in them. We mentioned a couple episodes, Jocko Willing telling a story, that when people come to him with bad news, his response is, well, good. It's not like, oh crap, like what are we going to do? It's like, good, let's figure it out. And I think that is something, a wildly intuitive kind of response to know that you from within can solve this. And that's something that I honed in and that I use to this day, as a friend, as a wife, as a parent now with little kids of my own, being able to learn the positive. And it's not just looking for a silver lining, but like learning the lesson from everything that you experience is immeasurable. I'm trying to read my last little bit of notes here, but I guess I'll just wrap because I mentioned, I keep going back to the, coaches, if you're listening. The contrast of my experiences just highlights the absolutely profound impact that coaching styles have on an athlete's experience, their success, their resilience. So while we can talk about coaching and having specific, skill coaches for everything, I never had a single private lesson when I played. We had our coach, but we had a solid foundation of well-rounded coaching and culture that was, unmatched. And really, thank God Freeman's not here sitting with me because it would be I would either be not wanting to say too many nice things about him, or he'd be over there being bashful about it. So if you can take away the character traits of resilience, of finding the lesson in every experience, then you've won. And so while we talk about, and we, this podcast and this business is called Unbound Performance, we said this last week, performance, we tend to hear and think of it as, I think when people see my sweatshirt, which I'll talk about this one in a minute, my Unbound Performance sweatshirt and my gear, I think people assume that it's some sort of, like physical skills type performance program. And I love when people ask about it because there's mental performance and there's physical performance, and everything we do is a performance if you think about it. Who we are is, we're not in a false, like fake way. We're always putting on something that is a performance of life. And when you have that mental side locked in, or you have support so that when you're not locked in, you've got a support system to help lift you up, hands down, the physical performance will come. So trust your gut. It's never too late. And coaches, culture is everything. Okay, I'm redoing this a little bit because I said I would talk about this sweatshirt, and I realized as I'm editing, I didn't talk about this sweatshirt. And this blurring is driving me nuts, so I'm so sorry. This sweatshirt says, can you see it? I don't know. Washed Up Athlete Social Club. There's an Instagram page called The Athlete Confidential, and they essentially just are a community where athletes can come and share their stories. They're very mental health focused, and I just love their gear. So I buy pretty much all of their stuff just to support them. So we've had connections with them before, and they're wonderful. So just a little shameless plug to them that I live in this sweatshirt because I feel like I'm like the chairman of the Washed Up Athlete Social Club. But that's a really amazing community. So give them a follow. You won't regret that.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.